access, like Kanye says, you're just a nigga in a Benz.
Yeah.
You know, so when he wasn't as mentally diverse as now, but
it was a choice,
right?
Apparently.
So, but so with that said, I think that's why when given the opportunity, that our pressure has always continuously been on. So we kind of rock and roll in stressful conditions. Like we can handle it. It's no sweat. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like we're conditioned to be in that environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, but having Lauren immediate access to those resources, at least being more familiar by the time you got to college, what kind of a profound effect do you think that may have on other young African American youth being able to have access to those resources?
What matters the most about having access is that you not only do you understand how the technology is and how it works at the moment, but you understand what it could be, because you've spent so much time kind of marinating on it and understanding how the whole system works that you can see into the future. You can see, well, you know, imagine if Twitter had X, you know, imagine if I had the internet, but it was faster and it did this, you know, imagine if my phone had 2 cameras, you know, all these kinds of things.
And now you know how to connect the two, not only the imagine, but the how to.
Exactly.
Are there any suggestions you can give where in which maybe that can help maybe somebody out there give an idea on where they can bring tech more to African American youth or people of color in Hispanics and lower income communities? What do you think? Is there an answer for that?
At this point,
is there an app we can make? Is there an app? I go to iTunes right now.
Man, wish it was. Man, if it is, I just hadn't thought of the idea. But a lot of it is, like you said, the resources, the hardware. The hardware has gotten a lot cheaper. Because you know, I mentioned my dad, he paid like $2,000 or something for that Sony Vaio, but now you can get a Raspberry Pi that's $35. It's way more powerful than, you know, that $2,000
that Vaio.
So,
so that's a good thing,
yeah.
Right. So accessibility is a little bit more obtainable. Yeah. Okay, so that's not bad. But for me personally, I think honestly, it's like, again, I go back to the root of the problem. It's like, who's benefiting from these children not being introduced to tech? And not only that, I also kind of blame the media. Just because you have 1 or 2 black nerds, but one of the most popular show about nerds is that
Big Bang Theory.
Big Bang Theory, where there was no black people, not even like a sidekick.
Nope.
It's white and Asians. It's exactly what I stated earlier.
Same thing with the Silicon Valley show, just more adult oriented. And
they seem to have a pass on being goofy and everything else, and we have to play the most proper, most best nerd, or, you know, the most gentlemanly gentleman, and they can kind of skate away with being the Zuckerberg, hood wearing, long hair man child at 30 something.
Yeah.
Right? So, but regardless of all that, it just seems, like they just get a huge pass. But then when it comes to hiring, it's like as if that doesn't get taken into account. That doesn't get taken into account that you had to wait till college to get introduced to coding. And that, Lauren, since you were engaged with technology, that's not the norm. Does that make sense? Yeah. My brother didn't leave Oakland until he was 20-something, 21. So unless Oakland provided it and made it cool, those resources were not even part of the language. Does that make sense? Just like you said, C++, like what? That's my grade. I don't know. You know, I don't know what you're talking about. So anyway, I think there's also, there are things as far as a community we can do. One is maybe not always throw a basketball in each other's hand or a mic. That's one thing. Not saying we all do, right? Yeah. But idolizing those people in those positions, not taking away from their success, but we do kind of idolize them. We do prop them up, but prop up those who have a laptop in their hand. And I think that's what made Black Panther so profound. It was because of the diverse array of black people, and their intelligence was shared not only in the masculine, but in the feminine, in the intelligent, the philosophical, and like it was amazing. Heck, the strongest guy was a vegetarian, right? Like that was. And
then the smartest character in the whole movie universe is a 16-year-old black girl.
Totally, and loving it, like owning the intelligence. Like that was, I think that That now imagine that. So you take what Black Panther, what it represented, the movie, and we know we don't need to explain it to each other. We only have to explain it to people who aren't. So you ever notice that? Anyway,
I think Wakanda is a real African country.
Yeah, they're like, oh yeah, exactly. They're probably gonna think we all know kung fu too. But you take that. Now, how do we apply that same pride and symbolism in everyday life, especially when it comes to our relationship to tech? Because not unfortunately, the reality is tech is only more and more a part of our life. Yeah. You saw Samsung commercial, you talk to your TV, it does this, that, and the third and the other. You talk to your fridge, it texts you. Mm-hmm. So if we don't, we'll get left behind. And it seems to be programmed that way, right? Mm-hmm. I stated the numbers.
I think we got to really, kind of like you said, with the media part, we got to definitely publicize ourselves. Because even with the media part, say like all the, people you hear about in tech like that are definitely, more so white, some Asian and stuff like that. But you hear about, the Zucks and the Steve Jobs.
You hear their successes.
Right. But the thing is,
the Alibabas.
Yeah. With all due respect, nobody really think they're like just cool. Like the coolest people on earth. Everybody, the thing that gets people, they're rich. That's what gets
totally
people
successful.
You're right. Is they're making ridiculous amounts of money. So, as a white kid or something like that, you see that.
And it looks like you.
It looks like you. It's like, oh, well, I'm just going to go,
that shit's going to be me.
That's going to be me. I'm going to get together my friends in the garage and create something that may suck, but we're going to get funded for it anyway.
Yes. So, going back to resources.
And accessibility, and... that's not to take away anything from anybody, but you hear the stories of Gates and Zuck and stuff being dropouts, not looking at the deeper picture that they already had connections to the tech industry.
And their parents already had access. That's why you're at Harvard. Like, let's be honest. And not only that, you think only like Puffy can get away with dropping out of college and having the tenacity, and his drive must have been off the charts to get to where he's at. Like, let's give all due respect. I mean, you can say whatever about his rapping and dancing, but the man knows business. Okay, I was listening to Larry Wilmore, his podcast called Black on the Air, and it's excellent. And this episode was like, he said the dangerous part about racism is the benefit of the doubt. And then when it comes to funding, that sure enough shows. White and Asians, they get the benefit of doubt. Here's $500,000. We'll see what happens. Ergo, Mark Zuckerberg. And while we have to have beyond the reasonable doubt proof, 3 degrees before you can be like, all right, we'll see if you're good to go. While on the other hand, it's a benefit of the doubt. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And it's hard when it's not even us hiring each other. We're not even in that position. Right, just because you hired a few doesn't, and if we're not in management or leadership roles, then that it gets watered down, this diversity idea. Let's go over fun fact number 2 for today. Okay, so 2/3 of white students report using computers at home, whereas only half of Black and Latino students do. So what does that mean to you? Think about that. I'll tell you about me. Okay, because I'm talking a lot. Obviously, that's privilege, man. Like, let's be honest. I mean, that's a privilege. It was a privilege for me growing up with my father, who's a Caucasian, Jewish, white American. He's conservative, ironically, and I'm far from it. But I love my dad. And I now look back and realize how lucky I was to have access to certain things. And I had access to computers. I was part of that white percentage, I guess. Right? So, Lauren, for you, when you went to college, I mean, I don't want to assume, of course, but was it like a hard leap for you to like, oh, I'm going to start getting into software engineering? Like, since you've had a history of engaging with technology as a young person, was it a hard transition for you?
No, I would say it wasn't a hard transition at all. The only thing that I had to get used to was the concept of programming. And I know William mentioned a lot of students had trouble because they had never been exposed to programming before, or maybe like a little bit of HTML. And then suddenly the class was conducted as if they had that experience. And I had the very same experience. I hadn't done any programming beyond HTML myself either, but I had at least enough experience with the technology that I could kind of wing it and say, okay, well, I think it works like this. I was never taught, but I think it works like this based on how I've seen it growing up.
Gotcha.
And I think another thing, just to your point about the 50% versus the 2/3, I had access to a lot of technology growing up, but what made it even more powerful is that my friends had access too. Because now I go to school and I'm like, oh, look at this MySpace thing. And they're like, oh, look at my LiveJournal. And now we're going back and forth and everybody's trying to compare their little website to whatever they're doing. And so if you can't share that knowledge with people, then you might not know how important it is.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like, even if you have access to technology and a relationship with it, that could be alienating just as much as not having it.
Right.
So having friends in a community that are engaging as well normalizes technology.
Yeah, because Lauren, I think she hit something, really strong right there, because I was in the opposite situation that, we definitely grew up, humble beginnings, but looking back, we did kind of have a little bit more than some of the other people in our community, because my dad was a county supervisor and an elected official.
Okay.
So, stable job and stuff
awesome.
like that, and then he was always a hustler too. Like, he was like a mechanic, whatever you needed.
I got it.
Yeah, he could do it. So, I was kind of like the only one who had like a computer like that. So, I couldn't really go out and talk to him, because I've been a nerd, as far as like, pretty much most nerd stuff, anime, all that type of stuff I was always into. But I had very few people, really none of my, my black,
counterparts,
when I was in school, was into any of that stuff. So,
did you keep it to yourself a lot? Like, okay, this is just my thing. When I get home, it's my thing. And then when you're, because I feel like that was for me in many ways. Like, I saw your post on Instagram once. And you said something about a black nerd, and I was like, yes, William will always like be somebody I'm gonna just reach out to once in a while, because you're African American too, and we both got glasses, so we're stylish, you know what I'm saying? But at the same time, owning the nerd part, and I think that's so awesome. Like that, I think that's one of the things I loved about James Baldwin, is that he owned his intellectuality and just like didn't give a shit and just smacked you in the face with it. Right. And that made being intellectual and philosophical so, I don't know, swag to me. Like, I just love James Baldwin for that. And that's what I just wish I had more of that images when I was growing up. I did. Shout out to Mr. Henderson at Longwood Middle School. He was awesome. He made sure that I loved history to this day. He'll never remember me, but Mr. Henderson was the first African American male teacher I ever had, and that always, as you can see, was such an awesome effect on me to see us. Like a Neil deGrasse Tyson kind of a thing. Yeah. Like, if I only had him, I may have been a science something. So I felt like many times I had to keep that in when I'm around some of my counterparts, because like being intelligent is threatening to our own people.
Yeah, and I absolutely hated that perception, because
you think you too good.
Yeah, luckily, as I mentioned, I grew up in a small town. I had a lot of relatives in that town. I have a huge extended family. So, I didn't have one of those stories of like, being, I was definitely known as just a smart black kid. Like, but I think my saving grace is that I was also reasonably athletic. Like, I played, basketball. I was a team captain, senior year and stuff like that. So, that was, I was able to balance out and have duality with it. But, I always knew that books would take me further than, any ball would, just because I knew that wasn't my gift. But it was very, rare that I had, connected with other black students over kind of like my things that I nerded out on. I always had a young cousin who was 2 years younger than me, that he was always the guy that I could, completely nerd out with.
Express.
And me and him we're still close to this day. So because we'd be like, oh man, you catch Dragon Ball Z yesterday and stuff like that.
Like, dude, you don't even know. Yeah.
But a lot of times, just because of my academics, I was always lumped in with the white students.
Totally.
So I was always caught in between worlds. you know, what all the black students.
I don't think people really understand that in America that we have to play both roles. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I hate to go back to Black Panther. That's so